Around the 2000 presidential election, many young people began to realize they were a no-future generation. A number of them took an interest in the LaRouche campaign's intervention into the insane presidential election. They realized that the questions of policy and politics were really epistemological questions that their prior educations had not prepared them to answer. In fact, they found that those who had experience with the modern university system had to overcome its crippling effects on their ability to think.
It became clear after coming around, especially after trying to read a single paper by Lyndon LaRouche, that the education that we've been given, that we were getting on the universities, was not adequate to discuss basic topics that are necessary to further human society, basic topics for economics. As he goes through this entire historical scientific arc that's required to make the point he's trying to make, you realize that that's just a void for the majority of our generation, no matter what quality of education you thought you were receiving.
These young people were confronted with the realization that their schooling wasn't merely inadequate, but that it had been fundamentally unsound. They saw that the degrees for which they had borrowed thousands of dollars, and for which their peers continued to borrow, were merely emblems of a person's willingness to submit to standard doctrine. They saw that the modern university system is a racket, that higher education does not wish to create seekers after truth, but to kill the truth, whether in the sciences, where the claim of empirical veracity and mathematical rigor masks what amounts to occult belief, or in the humanities, where a department like cultural anthropology could exist when the main idea from the department was that there is no truth.
I actually shopped a sociology class, Soc 1, and the first day of class, the professor's main point was to try to, disabuse anyone in his class who believed that anything was knowable by having them try to come up with examples of things that were true, and he would somehow try to say that they were actually just a societal norm. So it's a little bit beyond me why anyone would want to pay someone to teach them who maintains that there is no truth.
With only the barest minimum on which to rely from their former educations, these young people found themselves in a challenging situation.
Well, so we were stuck having to build an educational process up from scratch. And you don't realize you've got all these artifacts left over from how you thought about things like history, the way it was promoted in elementary school, high school to university.
For example, let's take all the people who believe in Euclidean geometry and who carry that belief in some form or other into present time. Because of that belief, which they had to adhere to get their degree, they have a factor of incompetence. I lack that incompetence.
So, relying on LaRouche's insight, they began to uncover what their formal educations had buried.
The model for how to understand, how to know that something is true when you see it, is Plato, is in the Plato dialogues. So that became an absolutely crucial part of the development of the youth movement, was having these Plato readings on Sunday, where you're really working through not the facts of the dialogue. You're not trying to get to some conclusion of the dialogue. If you wanted a conclusion, he would have written a treatise. You would have had the treatises of Plato. But instead, you've got the Platonic dialogues, because what you want to learn is the process of reaching truth, of attaining something that's true. And really the most important part of that is the process of sifting through bullshit. How do you decide what you're going to throw out and what you're not going to keep? And if you do that enough, you'll start to zero in on what it is you want to keep.
A real education is based on re-experiencing the acts of discovery of the greatest thinkers, rather than learning rules or formulas. Young researchers with the LaRouche Pack worked for years to uncover the true inner history of science, going through their findings at classes and weekend seminars. They became the living center of the American intellectual tradition and came to embody what universities ought to be. After a period of youthful intellectual investigation, LaRouche defined a narrow path, stressing the need to have a coherent comprehension of the internal development of science, starting from the Pythagoreans, through Kepler's discovery of universal gravitation, Gauss's discovery of the orbit of the asteroid Ceres, culminating with Riemann's investigation of physical hypergeometries. And so these young people set off, beginning with Johannes Kepler's major works, aided by websites, translations, animations, and documents produced by small advanced research teams. The first in-depth work was on Kepler's two major books, The New Astronomy and The Harmony of the World, where Kepler elaborates his discovery of universal gravitation, thus creating modern scientific practice. His unanswered questions provoked the future discoveries of such scientists as Leibniz, in the case of the physical integral calculus, and Gauss on the subject of elliptical functions. This website is the most thorough pedagogical material ever made for understanding Kepler's works. It was linked to by NASA's website.
As we were proceeding in doing this, all of a sudden here comes this mannequin website called keplersdiscovery.com, which attempts to do exactly what we did. But it's really a farce, it's a plagiarism, and it's wrong. A lot of the animations and the things they go through are just wrong.
This website was an obvious fraud. Every image on it specifically related to Kepler's works was copied from the WLYM.com website. And the copy was not even competent. Their complete lack of understanding shone through.